The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Windsor Castle as Detective Inspector Sarah Matthews received the most unusual assignment of her career. She had been working with the Royal Protection Unit for 8 years, but nothing had prepared her for what Chief Inspector Williams was about to tell her. "Matthews, we need you to look into something delicate," Williams said, sliding a thick manila folder across his mahogany desk. "It's about Queen Camilla's charitable donations." Sarah opened the folder and found herself staring at bank statements, donation records, and photographs of various charity events. The numbers were staggering. Over the past 3 years, Camilla had donated nearly £15 million to different organizations across the United Kingdom and beyond. "Sir, this seems like normal royal charity work," Sarah said, flipping through the pages. "What exactly am I looking for?" Williams leaned back in his leather chair and rubbed his temples. 3 weeks ago, we received an anonymous tip. Someone claims that these donations aren't what they appear to be. They suggest there's something much bigger happening behind the scenes. The tip had come through a secure government hotline, the caller using a voice modifier to disguise their identity. They had provided specific details about donation amounts and dates that proved they had inside knowledge. Most concerning was their final statement. "Follow the money trail, and you'll discover a network that reaches the highest levels of power." Sarah's first stop was the royal household's financial office in Buckingham Palace. The building's grandeur never failed to impress her, but today she was focused solely on her investigation. She met with Margaret Thornberry, the Queen's personal financial advisor, a sharp woman in her 60s who had managed royal finances for over 2 decades. "Detective Inspector, I must say this is highly unusual," Margaret said as she led Sarah through corridors lined with priceless artwork. "Her Majesty's charitable giving is thoroughly documented and completely transparent." They entered a spacious office where filing cabinets lined the walls, each containing meticulous records of royal expenditures. Margaret pulled out several thick binders and placed them on a large oak table. "Every donation goes through multiple approval processes," Margaret explained, opening the first binder. "We have internal audits, external accounting firms, and regular reviews by the Treasury." Sarah studied the records carefully. The donations appeared legitimate on the surface. Camilla had given money to children's hospitals, environmental organizations, veterans' charities, and educational foundations. Each transaction was properly documented with receipts and acknowledgement letters from the receiving organizations. However, as Sarah dug deeper, she noticed an interesting pattern. Many of the donations were made to smaller, lesser-known charities that had been established within the last 5 years. These organizations often had vague mission statements and limited public information available about their activities. "Margaret, can you tell me more about the Wessex Children's Foundation?" Sarah asked, pointing to a donation of £200,000 made 6 months earlier. Margaret's expression flickered with uncertainty for just a moment before she composed herself. "Oh, yes, they focus on educational programs for disadvantaged youth. Very worthy cause." Sarah made a note to investigate further. Something in Margaret's tone suggested she wasn't telling the complete truth. Over the next few days, Sarah visited several of the charity organizations that had received donations from Camilla. The first was the Wessex Children's Foundation, located in a modest office building in central London. The receptionist seemed nervous when Sarah introduced herself as a police officer investigating routine financial matters. "I'm sorry, but our director, Mr. Harrison, is out of the country," the young woman stammered. "He's been traveling for the past month setting up programs in Eastern Europe." Sarah asked to see their facilities and programs in operation, but was told that most of their work was conducted through partnerships with other organizations. The office itself was sparse, with only a few desks, basic furniture, and promotional materials that looked recently printed. The second charity on her list, the Green Future Initiative, had a similar setup. Their office was in an expensive district, but the space seemed underutilized for an organization that claimed to run environmental programs across multiple countries. The staff provided polite but vague answers to her questions about their specific activities and impact. At the third charity, the Heritage Preservation Society, Sarah encountered her first real lead, the office manager. An elderly man named Robert Chen seemed genuinely confused when she mentioned the large donation from Queen Camilla. "I'm sorry, Detective, but I think there's been some mistake," Robert said, checking his computer records. "We've never received any donation from Her Majesty. We're a small local organization that helps maintain historical sites in Surrey. Our annual budget is less than £50,000. Sarah showed him the official documentation, indicating a donation of £150,000 made to his organization just 4 months earlier. Robert examined the papers carefully and shook his head. "These documents show our organization's name and registration number, but this isn't our bank account," he said, pointing to the account information. "Someone has used our identity, but the money didn't come to us." This was the breakthrough Sarah had been looking for. Someone was creating fake charity organizations or hijacking the identities of legitimate ones to receive donations from the royal family. But why would they target Camilla specifically? And what were they doing with the money? Sarah returned to her office and began cross-referencing the bank account numbers from the fraudulent donations. The trail led her to a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts. Each transaction had been carefully designed to make the money disappear into untraceable financial networks. She contacted Detective Sergeant James Morrison, a financial crimes specialist who had worked with her on previous cases involving money laundering and fraud. James was a methodical investigator who could follow even the most complicated financial trails. "This is sophisticated work," James said after reviewing Sarah's findings. "Whoever is behind this has extensive knowledge of both the royal financial systems and international banking. They know exactly how to exploit the trust and prestige associated with royal charitable giving. Together, they mapped out the network of fake charities and shell companies. The operation involved at least 12 different organizations, multiple countries, and millions of pounds in misdirected donations. The money was being funneled through banks in Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, and Luxembourg before disappearing entirely." As they worked late into the evening, Sarah received a phone call that changed everything. The caller was the same anonymous tipster who had initially contacted the authorities, but this time they were willing to provide more specific information. "Meet me tomorrow at Hyde Park, near the Diana Memorial at 3 o'clock, the distorted voice said. "Come alone and bring everything you've discovered so far. There are people watching and we don't have much time." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The investigation had started as a routine inquiry into charitable fraud, but the caller's urgent tone suggested something much more dangerous was involved. The next afternoon, Sarah walked through Hyde Park carrying a briefcase containing copies of all her research. The Diana Memorial was crowded with tourists and locals enjoying the sunny weather, providing good cover for a clandestine meeting. At exactly 3 o'clock, a woman in her 40s approached Sarah. She was well dressed in a business suit and appeared nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder as she walked. "Detective Matthews?" the woman asked quietly. "I'm the one who called. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, and I work for the Cabinet Office." Dr. Hartwell explained that she had discovered the fraudulent charity network while conducting a routine security review of government financial partnerships. What she found was far more alarming than simple fraud. "The money isn't being stolen for personal gain," Dr. Hartwell explained as they walked along the park's winding paths. "It's being redirected to fund a covert intelligence network that operates independently of official government oversight." She handed Sarah a small USB drive containing encrypted files that detailed the true scope of the operation. According to her research, The fake charity network was just one part of a larger system designed to provide untraceable funding for sensitive operations. They're using the royal family's charitable reputation as cover, Dr. Hartwell continued. No one questions donations to worthy causes, especially when they come from the monarchy. It's the perfect laundering system. Sarah felt the weight of the USB drive in her pocket as Dr. Hartwell explained that the network had connections to intelligence agencies, private security firms, and powerful political figures. The scope of the operation extended far beyond anything she had imagined when she first opened that manila folder in Chief Inspector Williams' office. "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked. "Why not go directly to your superiors?" Dr. Hartwell stopped walking and looked directly at Sarah with fear in her eyes. "Because I believe some of my superiors are involved. When I tried to raise concerns through official channels, my access to relevant files was suddenly restricted. I've been reassigned to a different department, and I'm being watched." As they reached the edge of the park, Dr. Hartwell handed Sarah a business card for a secure communication service. "Use this if you need to contact me. Trust no one else with what you've learned until you understand the full extent of the network." Sarah watched as Dr. Hartwell disappeared into the London crowd, leaving her with more questions than answers. The investigation that had begun with simple charity fraud had evolved into something that could potentially threaten national security and the reputation of the royal family. Back at her office, Sarah spent hours reviewing the encrypted files on the USB drive. The documents contained detailed financial records, organizational charts, and communication logs that painted a picture of a sophisticated operation spanning multiple countries and involving hundreds of individuals. The network used the credibility and respectability of royal charitable giving to move money without scrutiny. Each fake charity was carefully designed to appear legitimate, with professional websites, registered addresses, and even fake staff profiles. The money would be received, quickly transferred through a series of shell companies, and then distributed to fund various covert activities. Sarah realized that Queen Camilla herself was likely unaware of how her donations were being misused. The deception was occurring at the administrative level, where trusted advisors and financial managers were directing funds to fraudulent organizations without the Queen's knowledge. As she prepared to leave the office that evening, Sarah noticed something troubling. Her computer showed signs of unauthorized access, and some of her research files had been viewed by unknown users. Someone was monitoring her investigation, which meant Dr. Hartwell's warnings about being watched were justified. Sarah carefully gathered all her physical evidence and stored it in a secure location outside the office. She would need to be extremely careful about how she proceeded with the investigation. The network they had uncovered had the resources and connections to protect itself, potentially putting both her career and her safety at risk. The next morning brought an unexpected development. Chief Inspector Williams called Sarah into his office with a grim expression on his face. "Matthews, I've received some concerning reports about your current investigation," he said, not meeting her eyes. "There are suggestions that you may have exceeded your authority and accessed classified information without proper clearance." Sarah felt a surge of alarm. Someone within the system was trying to shut down her investigation before she could uncover the full truth about the hidden authority network. "Sir, I've been following standard procedures," she replied carefully. "All my actions have been within the scope of the assignment you gave me." William shuffled through some papers on his desk before responding. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to reassign you to other duties while we review your handling of this case. Detective Inspector Collins will take over the charity investigation." Sarah knew that Collins was known for following orders without asking difficult questions. If he took over the investigation, the truth about the network would likely remain hidden forever. As she cleaned out her desk, Sarah made a crucial decision. She would continue investigating on her own time, using the evidence and contacts she had developed. The network had made a mistake by trying to silence her so quickly. Their reaction proved that she was getting close to something they desperately wanted to keep secret. That evening, Sarah used the secure communication service to contact Dr. Hartwell. They arranged to meet the following day at a small cafe in a quiet neighborhood, where they could discuss their next steps without being overheard or observed. The investigation had taken a dangerous turn, but Sarah was determined to expose the truth about how Queen Camilla's charitable donations had been hijacked to fund a covert network that operated in the shadows of legitimate government authority. The small cafe in Notting Hill was nearly empty when Sarah arrived early the next morning. She chose a corner table with a clear view of both entrances and ordered a simple coffee while waiting for Dr. Hartwell. The events of the previous day had left her feeling paranoid, constantly checking over her shoulder for signs of surveillance. Dr. Hartwell arrived precisely on time, wearing a different outfit and appearing even more nervous than during their first meeting. She sat down across from Sarah and immediately began speaking in hushed tones. "Things have gotten worse since yesterday," Elizabeth said, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her tea. "My office was searched last night. They claimed it was a routine security inspection, but I know they were looking for evidence of our contact." Sarah leaned forward, keeping her voice low. "Did they find anything?" "No. I've been careful to keep all sensitive materials off-site," Elizabeth replied. "But they're definitely suspicious. My supervisor asked me pointed questions about my recent activities and reminded me of my obligations under the Official Secrets Act." Elizabeth pulled out a small notebook and slid it across the table. "I've been doing more research on my own time. The network is much larger than we initially thought. It's not just about redirecting charity money. They're running a parallel intelligence operation that bypasses normal government oversight." Sarah opened the notebook and found detailed organizational charts, names, and connections that painted a disturbing picture. The network included current and former intelligence officers, private security contractors, political advisors, and even some members of parliament. "Look at page 12, Elizabeth whispered. "That's where it gets really interesting." Sarah flipped to the indicated page and found a diagram showing connections between the fake charity network and a private intelligence firm called Meridian Strategic Services. The company claimed to provide security consulting for multinational corporations, but according to Elizabeth's research, they were conducting unauthorized surveillance and intelligence gathering operations. "Meridian has contracts with several government departments," Elizabeth explained. "But they're also taking private jobs that conflict with official policy. They're using the charity money to fund operations that the government would never officially approve." Sarah studied the connections more carefully. Several names on the chart were familiar from her years working in law enforcement. These were respected professionals with access to sensitive information and significant influence within the security establishment. "How long has this been going on?" Sarah asked. "Based on the financial records, at least 5 years, Elizabeth replied. "But I suspect it started much earlier. The charity fraud is just the most recent evolution of their funding methods." Elizabeth explained that the network had previously used defense contracts, foreign aid programs, and even pension funds to divert money for their operations. Each time authorities got close to discovering one funding source, they would shift to a new method. "The royal charity angle was brilliant," Elizabeth admitted grudgingly. "No one questions the monarchy's charitable giving, and the amounts involved are large enough to fund significant operations without appearing suspicious." Sarah made careful notes as Elizabeth described the network's structure. At the top was a small group of individuals who made strategic decisions and maintained connections with official government agencies. Below them were operational teams that conducted surveillance, intelligence gathering, and what Elizabeth euphemistically called influence operations. "What kind of influence operations?" Sarah asked. Elizabeth hesitated before answering. "Media manipulation, political pressure, economic interference. They work to advance certain policies and protect specific interests, often in ways that benefit private corporations or foreign governments. The scope of the network's activities was staggering. They had influenced Brexit negotiations, manipulated stock prices to benefit their clients, and even interfered in local elections to ensure favorable outcomes for their sponsors. "We need to gather more evidence before we can expose this," Sarah said. "Do you have any contacts within Meridian Strategic Services?" Elizabeth shook her head. "It's too dangerous, but I do have an idea. There's a former colleague of mine, Dr. Michael Foster, who left the Cabinet Office 6 months ago under mysterious circumstances. I think he discovered something about the network and was forced out. Dr. Foster was now working as an independent security consultant, which gave him more freedom to investigate without official oversight. Elizabeth believed he might be willing to help if they could convince him that they were serious about exposing the truth. They arranged to contact Dr. Foster through an intermediary, a journalist named Rachel Green, who specialized in investigative reporting on government corruption. Rachel had built a reputation for protecting her sources and had the resources to handle sensitive information safely. Over the following week, Sarah continued her official duties while secretly pursuing the investigation. She used her access to police databases to research the individuals identified in Elizabeth's notebook, building detailed profiles of their backgrounds and connections. The picture that emerged was troubling. Many of the network's key figures had worked together in previous positions, moving between government agencies, private corporations, and international organizations. They maintained their connections even after leaving official positions, creating an informal power structure that operated parallel to elected government. Sarah's breakthrough came when she discovered that several fake charity bank accounts were managed by the same financial services firm. Blackstone Financial Management handled accounts for at least 8 of the fraudulent organizations, despite claiming to specialize in legitimate business banking. She decided to visit Blackstone's offices under the pretense of investigating a different financial crime case. The building was modern and expensive, located in London's financial district among legitimate banking institutions. The receptionist directed Sarah to meet with Richard Blackstone, the firm's founder and managing director. He was a polished man in his 50s who seemed genuinely surprised by her visit. "Detective Matthews, I'm not sure how we can help you," Blackstone said as he led her to his office. "We maintain strict confidentiality regarding our clients' accounts." Sarah presented her credentials and explained that she was investigating suspicious financial activities that might involve money laundering. She carefully avoided mentioning the royal connection or the specific charities involved. "Of course, we're always happy to cooperate with law enforcement," Blackstone replied, but his tone had become more guarded. "However, you'll need appropriate warrants to access specific account information." Sarah had expected this response, but she was more interested in observing Blackstone's reactions and gathering general information about the firm's operations. She asked about their procedures for verifying new clients and monitoring unusual transactions. "We follow all regulatory requirements," Blackstone assured her. "Every new account goes through comprehensive due diligence, and we have sophisticated systems for detecting suspicious activities." However, as they talked, Sarah noticed several inconsistencies in Blackstone's explanations. He seemed unusually familiar with charity organizations and their typical financial patterns, despite claiming that Blackstone Financial Management primarily served commercial clients. After leaving the meeting, Sarah conducted more research on Blackstone himself. She discovered that he had previously worked for the Treasury Department's Financial Intelligence Unit, where he would have had access to information about money laundering investigations and regulatory procedures. More importantly, Sarah found evidence that Blackstone had maintained relationships with several former colleagues who now worked for intelligence agencies and private security firms. The connection suggested that he might be deliberately facilitating the money laundering operation rather than simply providing routine banking services. Sarah shared her findings with Elizabeth during another carefully arranged meeting. This time, they met at the British Library, where they could blend in among researchers and students while discussing sensitive information. Blackstone is definitely part of the network, Elizabeth confirmed after reviewing Sarah's research. I've seen his name in internal communications that I wasn't supposed to access. He's not just providing banking services. He's actively coordinating financial operations for multiple clients. Elizabeth had also made progress in her own investigation. Through careful analysis of government procurement records, she had identified several contracts that appeared to be vehicles for directing money to the network. They're using legitimate government spending to supplement the charity money, Elizabeth explained. Security consulting contracts, research projects, technology purchases, millions of pounds are being diverted to fund unauthorized operations. The scope of the financial manipulation was becoming clear. The network had created a comprehensive system for accessing and redirecting money from multiple sources, making it nearly impossible to track the full extent of their funding or activities. Elizabeth had also made contact with Dr. Foster through Rachel Green. The former Cabinet Office official was indeed aware of the network and had been conducting his own investigation since leaving government service. "Foster wants to meet with us," Elizabeth said. "But he's insisted on extreme security precautions. He believes the network has infiltrated multiple government agencies and law enforcement organizations." They arranged to meet Dr. Foster at a conference center during a large academic event, where hundreds of people would provide cover for their conversation. Foster had suggested they pose as attendees at a symposium on international security policy. The meeting was scheduled for the following weekend, giving Sarah time to prepare additional evidence and research questions. She was particularly interested in learning more about the network's connections to foreign intelligence services, which Elizabeth's documents had only hinted at. However, Sarah's plans were disrupted when she received an unexpected visit at her apartment on Friday evening. Two men in dark suits identified themselves as officers from the security service and requested to speak with her about her recent activities. "Detective Matthews, we understand you've been conducting inquiries related to national security matters," said the older of the two men, who introduced himself as Agent Thompson. "We'd like to discuss your findings and ensure that sensitive information is handled appropriately." Sarah felt a surge of alarm. The network's influence apparently extended into the intelligence agencies themselves, and they were now taking direct action to contain her investigation. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," Sarah replied carefully. "I've been working on a routine financial fraud case involving charitable organizations." Agent Thompson smiled, but his expression remained cold. "We're aware of the specific nature of your investigation, Detective. We're here to help you understand the bigger picture and ensure that your efforts don't inadvertently compromise ongoing national security operations." Thompson's partner, who remained silent throughout the conversation, took out a tablet and showed Sarah photographs of her meetings with Elizabeth and her visit to Blackstone Financial Management. They had been conducting comprehensive surveillance of her activities. "As you can see, we've been monitoring the situation," Thompson continued. "The matters you've been investigating involve classified operations that are essential to national security. We need your cooperation to ensure that sensitive information doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Sarah realized that she was being warned to stop her investigation, but the agents were doing it in a way that made it difficult for her to refuse or complain officially. They were presenting themselves as protectors of national security rather than as threats. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Sarah asked. "Simply continue with your normal duties and allow appropriate authorities to handle security-related matters," Thompson replied. "The investigation you've been conducting touches on operations that are far beyond your clearance level and jurisdiction." Thompson handed Sarah a business card with only a phone number printed on it. "If you discover any additional information related to these matters, please contact us immediately rather than pursuing it independently." We want to ensure your safety and the security of ongoing operations." After the agents left, Sarah sat in her apartment feeling a mixture of fear and determination. The visit confirmed that she was getting close to exposing something significant, but it also made clear that the network had the power to use official government resources to protect itself. Sarah decided to proceed with the meeting with Dr. Foster, but she would need to be extremely careful about surveillance and security. The network was now aware of her investigation and would be watching her every move. She used an encrypted messaging service to contact Elizabeth and warn her about the visit from the security service agents. They would need to adjust their plans and take additional precautions to protect their safety and their sources. The investigation had reached a critical point. Sarah and Elizabeth had gathered enough evidence to prove the existence of the network, but exposing it would require them to risk their careers and, potentially, their lives. The network had shown that it was willing to use both official authority and unofficial pressure to protect its operations. As Sarah prepared for the meeting with Dr. Foster, she realized that she was no longer just investigating financial fraud. She was uncovering a shadow system of power and influence that threatened the democratic institutions she had sworn to protect. The stakes had never been higher, and the consequences of failure would extend far beyond her personal career. The weekend meeting would determine whether they could gather enough additional evidence to expose the network publicly, or whether the forces arrayed against them would succeed in keeping their operations hidden in the shadows of legitimate authority. The International Security Policy Conference at the Royal Institution was bustling with academics, government officials, and security professionals when Sarah arrived on Saturday morning. She had spent considerable time preparing her cover story as a graduate student researching financial aspects of national security, complete with fake university credentials that Elizabeth had helped her obtain. Dr. Michael Foster was easier to spot than Sarah had expected. Elizabeth had described him as tall and distinguished with graying hair, but it was his nervous energy and constant awareness of his surroundings that gave him away. He was standing near the registration table, pretending to study the conference program while actually watching everyone who entered the building. Sarah approached him during the coffee break following the first presentation session. "Excuse me, are you Dr. Foster? I'm Sarah Jenkins from Oxford. Dr. Hartwell suggested you might have insights into my research on alternative funding mechanisms in security operations." Foster's eyes immediately sharpened with recognition. "Miss Jenkins, yes. Elizabeth mentioned you might be here. Perhaps we could find a quieter place to discuss your research interests." They moved to a small lecture hall that was currently empty, where Foster immediately began checking for listening devices, using a small electronic scanner he produced from his briefcase. "I'm sorry for the paranoia," Foster said as he completed his sweep, "but recent events have made me extremely cautious about electronic surveillance." Sarah was impressed by Foster's professionalism and preparation. "Elizabeth told me you discovered something significant before leaving the cabinet office." Foster nodded grimly. "I stumbled across the network by accident while conducting a routine audit of interdepartmental cooperation on counterterrorism initiatives. What I found was a parallel intelligence structure that operates independently of normal government oversight." He pulled out a leather portfolio containing carefully organized documents. "The network you've been investigating is just one component of a much larger operation. They call themselves the Meridian Group, named after their primary operational front, Meridian Strategic Services." Foster explained that the Meridian Group had been established approximately 10 years earlier by a coalition of former intelligence officers, military contractors, and political advisors who believed that official government agencies were too restricted by legal oversight and political considerations to effectively protect national interests. They started small, taking on private consulting contracts and conducting discrete operations for corporate clients, Foster continued. But over time, they've evolved into something much more ambitious and dangerous. The group had gradually infiltrated multiple government agencies, placing their members or sympathizers in key positions where they could influence policy decisions and access classified information. They maintained official cover through legitimate employment while secretly coordinating their activities through the network. The charity fraud you discovered is just their latest funding mechanism, Foster explained. They've used defense contracts, foreign aid programs, and even pension investments to generate untraceable money for their operations. Sarah took careful notes as Foster described the group's structure and activities. The Meridian Group operated through a cell-based system similar to terrorist organizations, with each unit having limited knowledge of other operations to maintain security. "What kind of operations are they conducting?" Sarah asked. Foster's expression darkened. "They've interfered in democratic processes, manipulated media coverage of political events, conducted unauthorized surveillance on British citizens, and even arranged for the elimination of individuals they considered threats to their interests." The scope of the group's activities was staggering. They had influenced Brexit negotiations by providing false intelligence to government negotiators, manipulated stock prices to benefit their corporate sponsors, and interfered in foreign elections to advance British commercial interests. They justify their actions by claiming they're protecting national security, Foster said, but in reality, they're advancing the interests of a small group of wealthy individuals and corporations who fund their operations. Foster had been forced to leave the cabinet office when he tried to raise concerns about the group through official channels. His superiors had claimed his evidence was insufficient and suggested that he was misinterpreting legitimate cooperation between government agencies and private contractors. "The problem is that some of my superiors were actually part of the network," Foster explained. "They knew exactly what I had discovered, and they moved quickly to discredit me and remove me from any position where I could cause problems." Foster had continued his investigation independently, using his extensive contacts within the security establishment to gather additional evidence. What he had discovered was even more disturbing than his original findings. "The Meridian Group has connections to similar networks in other countries," Foster said. "They're part of an international coalition that coordinates activities across national boundaries, essentially creating a shadow government structure that operates beyond the reach of democratic oversight." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the implications of what Foster was telling her. The investigation that had started with Queen Camilla's charitable donations had uncovered a threat to democratic governance itself. "What do you think we should do with this information?" Sarah asked. Foster was quiet for a moment before responding. "We need to gather enough evidence to make the story impossible to ignore or suppress. That means documenting specific operations, identifying key personnel, and proving direct connections between the network and illegal activities." Foster had a plan for exposing the Meridian Group, but it would require significant risks from everyone involved. They would need to coordinate with investigative journalists, parliamentary oversight committees, and potentially international law enforcement agencies. "The challenge is that the group has infiltrated the very institutions we would normally rely on for oversight and accountability," Foster explained. "We have to be extremely careful about who we trust and how we proceed." Foster had identified several specific operations conducted by the Meridian Group that could provide the evidence needed for exposure. One involved manipulation of parliamentary votes on defense spending through blackmail and bribery. Another concerned unauthorized surveillance of environmental activists who were protesting government policies. "The most damaging evidence concerns their involvement in the death of a whistleblower," Foster said quietly. "Dr. Amanda Richardson was a Treasury analyst who discovered their use of foreign aid money to fund operations in Africa. She died in a car accident 3 days after contacting a journalist about her findings." Foster produced a file containing Dr. Richardson's research and evidence suggesting her death was not accidental. The car accident had occurred on a remote road under suspicious circumstances, and the police investigation had been unusually brief and superficial. If we can prove that the Meridian Group murdered Dr. Richardson to protect their operations, that would be enough to bring down the entire network, Foster said. However, investigating Dr. Richardson's death would require access to police files, forensic evidence, and witness statements that would be difficult to obtain without official cooperation. They would also be putting themselves at significant personal risk by pursuing evidence of murder. Elizabeth arrived at the conference during the lunch break, having taken elaborate precautions to avoid surveillance. She met with Sarah and Foster in the institution's library, where they could continue their discussion while maintaining cover as academic researchers. "I've made progress on the financial side of the investigation," Elizabeth reported. "I've identified the specific accounts and transactions used to redirect the royal charity money, and I've traced some of the funds to specific operations." Elizabeth had discovered that money from Queen Camilla's donations had been used to fund surveillance operations against environmental groups protesting government energy policies. The surveillance had been conducted by Meridian Strategic Services under contract with an unnamed government department. The contract documents show clear violations of privacy laws and regulations governing surveillance of British citizens, Elizabeth explained. "If we can prove the connection between the charity money and these illegal operations, we'll have evidence of both fraud and civil rights violations." Foster was impressed by Elizabeth's research, but worried about the dangers they faced. "The group is already aware of our investigation. They've used official channels to pressure Sarah, and they've probably identified both of you as threats to their operations." Foster had noticed signs of surveillance during his travel to the conference and suspected that the Meridian Group was monitoring all of their activities. He advised extreme caution in their future communications and movements. "We need to move quickly to expose what we've discovered," Foster said. "The longer we wait, the more time they have to cover their tracks and neutralize potential threats." Foster had arranged to meet with Rachel Green, the investigative journalist, the following week. Rachel had extensive experience exposing government corruption and had the resources to publish their findings safely. Rachel has agreed to coordinate with parliamentary oversight committees and international media outlets to ensure the story receives maximum coverage, Foster explained. But she needs comprehensive evidence that can withstand legal challenges and official denials. They spent the remainder of the afternoon organizing their evidence and planning their approach to Rachel. They would need to provide documentation of the charity fraud, evidence of the Meridian Group's structure and operations, and proof of specific illegal activities. As the conference ended, Sarah felt both hope and fear about what they were attempting. Exposing the Meridian Group could restore accountability to government operations and protect democratic institutions, but it could also result in serious personal consequences for everyone involved. The following Tuesday, Sarah, Elizabeth, and Foster met with Rachel Green at her office in an unmarked building near Fleet Street. Rachel was the experienced journalist in her 40s who specialized in complex investigative stories involving government corruption and corporate malfeasance. "What you've uncovered is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told," Rachel said after reviewing their evidence. "But you're right to be concerned about the risks. These people have demonstrated that they're willing to use extreme measures to protect their operations." Rachel explained her plan for publishing the story in coordination with parliamentary investigators and international media partners. She would need several weeks to verify the evidence and arrange for simultaneous publication to prevent suppression. "The key is making the story too big to ignore or deny," Rachel said. "If we can coordinate publication in multiple countries and ensure that parliamentary committees are prepared to launch immediate investigations, it will be much harder for the network to contain the damage." Rachel had already begun preliminary discussions with oversight committees in Parliament and had contacts with journalists in other countries who could publish related stories about international aspects of the network. However, Rachel also warned them about the personal risks they faced. "You need to understand that exposing this network will likely end your careers in government service and could put your safety at risk. Are you prepared for those consequences? Sarah, Elizabeth, and Foster looked at each other before Sarah responded. We became police officers and civil servants to protect the public and uphold democratic values. If we don't expose this network, who will? Rachel smiled at their determination. Then let's bring down the Meridian Group and restore accountability to government operations. Over the following weeks, Rachel worked to verify their evidence and prepare for publication. Sarah returned to her official duties while secretly gathering additional information. Elizabeth continued her research from her new position, and Foster coordinated with international contacts to document the network's activities in other countries. The investigation that had begun with Queen Camilla's charitable donations had uncovered a sophisticated threat to democratic governance. The Meridian Group had used the trust and prestige associated with royal charity to fund operations that undermined the very institutions they claimed to protect. As publication day approached, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. What had started as a routine investigation into financial irregularities had evolved into an effort to expose one of the most serious threats to democratic oversight and accountability in modern British history. The Royal Sentinels had followed Camilla's donations and revealed a hidden authority network that operated in the shadows of legitimate government. Now it was time to bring that network into the light and restore proper oversight to the institutions that served the public interest. The story would be published simultaneously in major newspapers across 3 countries, with parliamentary oversight committees prepared to launch immediate investigations. The Meridian Group's years of operating beyond democratic accountability were about to come to an end, thanks to the courage of a few individuals who refused to let corruption hide behind the prestige of royal charity and national security.